everybody. Thank you for being here today. My name is Sarah Graf-Henning-Palermo. That's another picture that Emily made of me. You can hire her to illustrate your talks. I highly recommend it. Anyway, I exist on Twitter. And today I'm here to talk to you about being the ally that you want to be. The one you probably already think yourself to be, and about doing this at work in particular. And that's not because it's not important elsewhere, right? But because work is where we spend a huge proportion of our time and where we undertake a lot of the biggest, most complex projects that we'll ever work on, outside building a family or art or like your own house. And so despite people sometimes suggesting that we not take what happens at the office personally or separate it from real life, it obviously is a part of our real personal life just for the time that we devote to it, and it's important to be a person there. So I've been a designer and an engineer person at work for something like 12 years now, and I found myself in a number of situations where people who believe very much in undoing the structural inequalities that constrain underrepresented folks at work actually can take actions and support structures that make things worse. So today I'm going to share some insights and strategies that I hope will help us undertake more productive actions in the future. I've given a bunch of talks in my career about fun things like types and compilers and code art. I also just broke this computer. Stay. Never gesticulate. Bring your own dongle, never gesticulate. These are my 2 tips to you. Sure, you made it fall the right way. Okay, so I've given all of these fun talks about code and compilers and art, but this is the first time that I'm giving a non-technical talk, a diversity and inclusion talk, a very personal talk. I'm not really sure what the salient characteristic of this is, but I do know that I'm kind of terrified to give this. Still right now, standing here on this stage, I have rehearsed a ton, and I'm probably more nervous than I've ever been. And there's a lot of good reasons for that, right? I'm afraid of people thinking that I am here to make excuses for being bad at my job, for being bad at code. Or maybe the inverse. Maybe I'm a bad person and like bad things have happened because I deserve it. Now this will like all be revealed when people respond on Twitter. I probably shouldn't have told you what my name was. Then there's always the fear of becoming a D&I person only, a microphone builder, right? You build a microphone and people think that's all that you can do. Or maybe I'll miss out on some great opportunity someday in the future because I've gotten this reputation as a troublemaker. These are all kind of scary things. But why am I here talking to you then, right? Well, obviously I think that there's value. I want to give this talk because I genuinely believe that most people want to do good. And honestly, if you haven't tuned out or gone for a walk or gotten on your phone already, you're probably one of those people. And I think, you might like my strategies. I also suspect, given, shall we say, the current political situation, that more people than usual might be already sensitized to bad faith ploys from the powerful. And then there's the biggest reason of all, right? I have a lot to gain, and maybe more than we think, right? It's not the benefit of building a fairer world in the abstract because we believe in fairness. And it's not even about equal access to a job that pays well or projects that are fun to work on, although those are really great things to have, right? Really, it's about fighting sort of this deeper corrosion, a sort of lifetime enfeeblement that's the result of ongoing constraint and undermining that characterizes systematic oppression in the workplace. When people experience systematic oppression at work, they experience it as being ignored, passed over, undermined, or subject to expectations beyond those of their coworkers. Often they're then convinced that this is happening because of some personal failing, right? Too forward, not forward enough, not kind enough, too nice, not convincing enough, not projecting enough authority, being too bossy, not being technical enough, being too technical, having outsized expectations, having low expectations, and always using the wrong tone, whatever you're doing. And then you fight for this chance, you fight to get the chance to do something hard or interesting, and then once you have it, you better not fuck it up. But fucking it up is what it takes to get better, especially in our field. Experience isn't going to the office every day and doing the same stuff you know how to do for 5 years. It's going to the office and biting off more than you can chew and learning lessons that come from real life and not books or Medium posts. And to systematically deny this to people while suggesting that that's actually their own personal failing is to prevent them from reaching their true capability, their final form. And instead to task them with continually rebuilding a belief in themselves that the less affected take is birthright. So, right, as Kate Houston puts it, it's taking less impactful projects and being kind of a jerk. It's focusing too much on something else because that's where you feel appreciated. It's feeling never safe, and that's not any good way to live. And not to be super emo, you guys, but we only live once. And to spend our lives fighting crappy battles instead of building beautiful and useful systems we construct when we have the space to imagine, that kind of sucks. To spend our lives being killed by the stress of it all extra fast, that's worth being called a hidden violence, and something that's worth taking the risk of you all thinking less of me to have a chance of undoing. So I'm afraid, but I'm also hopeful that this might get me and people like me a little bit more free. And now, thank you for the free therapy session. All of your checks are in the mail. I'm going to talk about my top 6 strategies for making a real difference, with some research and some anecdotes to back them up. And a note about anecdotes, by the way, I'm going to mention some comments and experiences from this woman, Joan. And sometimes she's me, and sometimes she's people I know, and sometimes she's just people on the internet who said something that I found, kind of apt. And who it is not important, because what's important is attempting a balance between the personal and the general, because whereas personal stories can maybe open us up for judgment as to whether we as individuals kind of were asking for something, research allows us to slip into impersonal descriptions that remove the force of actual events they discuss and allow us to imagine them happening to someone else, somewhere else, instead of to our friends and loved ones right here, right now. So let's talk about these tactics. Some of them I think might sound counterintuitive, but I think if you come along with me on this journey, maybe we'll learn something. I'm going to go from most to least concrete and least to most controversial, maybe. So let's start with number 1, push for process. So how many of you are familiar with the essay, The Tyranny of Structurelessness? Yeah, some people, awesome. My guerrilla campaign is working. It was written by Joe Freeman in 1972 in response to common organizing practices within the women's liberation movement, where non-hierarchical informal organizations were the norm, in part out of reaction to the experiences that many women had had with formal structures, which were used to formally oppress them or leave them on the outside. And for reasons with roots in the same counterculture traditions, of course, many software companies are averse to explicit processes. And in both cases, the outcome is the same. Access to power is limited to informal networks. The workings of power are obfuscated, and power loses its accountability to the people where it's meant to be leading. And maybe it seems a lot to jump right straight into power. I think sometimes we find that word uncomfortable, because we just want to be friendly and work together and not suffer these unequal dynamics. But they're going to exist whether we want them to or not. And as Silicon Valley historian Fred Turner puts it, when formality is removed, so too is the ability to explicitly negotiate the distribution of resources, the projects we work on, the ideas we devote spikes to, access to stretch opportunities. Informal decision-making also weights things heavily towards those who already possess power, which sometimes can be rendered as coolness or as credibility. One Joan talks about working in an organization where decision-making was consensus-based and always informal, without an explicit process for creating that consensus or keeping true to those decisions once they were made. In this situation, somehow, it was always the white guys' ideas who came out on top. Super weird, right? They just had so much more credibility, Joan said. And this is borne out by research. In studying bloggers whose informal information exchange can be similar to the types of discussions we have with coworkers, Corey Armstrong and Melinda McAdams found posts supposedly written by men were consistently rated more credible than those said to be written by women, even when they were the same post. When this credibility gap is combined with our propensity to agree with people we like and to like people we think are like us, we can see how this might tilt the field towards those who are already assumed to have credibility and to be like the majority of the engineering team. The flip side of this shows up in polls as well, with Pew finding that of Black STEM employees, nearly half had experienced situations in which they were not treated as competent, as did over a quarter of women. Of course, lack of process doesn't just tilt the field towards the already empowered, it also provides a smokescreen over the exercise of power, which opens space for denial of power dynamics and the concomitant removal of accountability for actions taken and their outcomes. This is how exclusive things just happen, or how inequality becomes just the way things are, a pretty gross formulation in defense of the status quo. Sorry, that was all really depressing. The talk gets livelier, I swear. So, fortunately, Freeman doesn't just diagnose a problem. She has suggestions for a way out that holds to the goal of a less stultifying organization, less rigid hierarchy and bureaucracy, and instead uses explicitness to bolster democratization and inclusivity. Because look, you're not going to have an inclusive workplace until you change the way power works as well as access to it. And the main equation is this. Spread out power, circulate information way more than you think you need to, and ensure equal access to resources. Spreading out power means breaking it into small pieces, distributing those pieces across as many roles as possible, rotating who occupies those roles, and making it clear how to become qualified to hold those roles. I tend to think of this as tying authority to the position as opposed to the person. And while leveling in roles in the workplace might never be perfectly democratic, doing things like creating technical values and hiring review committees with members from across levels and demographics and a clear way to sort of produce recommendations and undertake them is part of creating a truly inclusive workplace. It also helps alleviate a common problem that arises when underrepresented folks move up the ranks or new people enter the company, the constant demands to prove oneself. When power adheres in a position, then the holder of that position essentially has the weight of the institution behind them. It's a stamp among stamps, and it can help free Joan from the proof treadmill. You can see Joan using this principle when she gets not just an undergrad degree, but a master's, maybe two. When she fights to keep the word engineer or senior in her title. When she speaks at conferences you've heard of. When she's sure to work at a company you've heard of. Each time, she gets a little stamp in her book of proofs that she's actually competent. And you make things easier for her when you design structures to support this. And maybe you're thinking, Sarah, wouldn't it be better to make all of this unnecessary? And yes, probably, but making it easier to refer to a list of achievements is something we can do today as opposed to entirely changing how people work, which will maybe work in 100 years when all of us are dead. Sorry, it's not really cheerier. That was all a lie. Principle number 2, circulating information. I'm going to let Freeman tackle this diffusion of information because honestly, I can't improve on her argument here, or this one. Hoarding information horizontally or vertically in your informal network, which I'm going to remind you again is going to be people like you, is an especially pernicious way of limiting inclusivity. You let people form opinions before the real discussions even happened. Finally, once people have access to this information in positions which allow them to take action, we want to ensure equal access to other resources, tying with different groups like design or QA or ops or even physical locations. Once people are able to act and know what to act on, give them the support to undertake these actions. Altogether, the effectiveness of this approach is backed up both by research, in which the formalization of structures was shown to increase perceptions of justice along 3 axes, and by observation. We can see that organizations with very explicit processes, say the post office or the MTA, and even some stodgy old corporations, are much more likely to have members of minority populations in positions of authority, because there's a really clear process. So that was a big one and a depressing one, so we're going to refresh ourselves with something a little bit smaller in number 2. Stop calling people talented. This is a tiny change that can have a really big knock-on effect. So I'm going to let Rosie break it down here. And she's talking about Aretha Franklin's death and the obits that followed, but the effect is the same wherever it happens. When you call somebody who's over the age of 19 talented, what you're doing is erasing all the effort they've put into their skills, and also sometimes implying to yourself as much as to others that they don't have a track record of learning and refining, which can again lead up to the idea that they shouldn't be taking on bigger projects. As Tanya Riley put it in her recent talk on being glue, I'm good at everything I put effort into. So what looks like an inborn talent or skill is often something that people have put a whole lot of work into. More unfortunately, the word talented is often paired with personality criticism, as was the case with a popular example from Kieran Schneider's research into bias in performance reviews. Spoiler, women get a ton of personality criticism. The fear of having one's skill erased is real. Earlier this year, Mecca Okereke put together an in-depth and regrettably necessary thread about how to be sure any Jones project's difficulty is not retroactively revised once she has achieved it. The main tactic is to get someone with credibility to say it's hard in public, and then point it out later, right? But even having to undertake such shenanigans is disheartening. So altogether, when you start ascribing someone's skills to talent, you may be going down the path of removing credit, judging folks by how much you like them, which again, I'm just gonna keep telling you, has so much to do with how much you are like them, and undermining the work they do. So let's try skilled or brilliant instead. The next two recommendations I'm gonna discuss together, since they both feed into one another, and I think are at the center of a lot of mistaken ally behaviors today. Screw civility and forget fairness. Another way to put this is to say consider power. They sound nice, but because of power differentials, they're usually not nice. Instead, they wind up being used as weapons of silence. Civility in particular, as a goal in tech, comes from a really good place, trying to undermine the brilliant jerk stereotype that put skill above kindness, ran women out of companies in the first place, and made them miserable cesspools. But unfortunately, much like structurelessness, it hasn't worked out the way people hoped, and instead can become a smokescreen for the powerful to hide behind. And that's really the first objection to civility. The way it's used as a tool to silence people. Every Joan has a story of her objection to inappropriate behavior being sent back to her as a tone problem. This is maybe most clear in the situation where by naming a problem, Joan becomes a problem. And this is a really great little tour that I recommend people taking a look at in the slides at the end of this, that sort of walks through the stages from honeymoon to becoming the problem and being managed out because, you know, it was you. And another Joan reminded me to be sure to mention how civility is totally different for men and women. I'm now just starting to call this the Serena bind. After the most recent US Open. And in a lot of ways, Serena's the ultimate Joan. She's obviously great at her job, and yet second-guessed and undermined for decades. Closer to home, I can sort of think of no better object lesson than Kelsey's response to Gary Bernhardt rewrote some Linus eruption a while ago. And it was really funny because all of the Joans who read it were like, oh, there were no like smiley faces or like exclamation points. If I wrote that, I would be in so much trouble. And research bears all this out too, but I'm not going to get into it because there's lots of other stuff to say, and you guys know this is true. So, follow-on expectations from civility are also pernicious, right? Like the notion of being humble and team-oriented is what you should focus on, and if your work is good enough, then people are just going to notice and boost you. That's not only untrue, but it applies pressure in two ways. First, by taking Joan's skills so that they're being used to support other people and she never gets the credit of her experience. And second, the idea that hard work is enough feeds that insidious doubt I was talking about before, right? That you're just not good enough. Otherwise, wouldn't they have noticed by now? And I'm not saying that I think teamwork is fundamentally bad by any means, but working without taking care to be certain that the team is actually working for everyone who's on that team, expectations for humility can become just another fig leaf over coercion. Finally, placing civility in position as a gatekeeping virtue also puts an extra strain on underrepresented people who, let's be honest, are probably very frustrated and reasonably so. Being underestimated, ignored, and stymied, which is a type of social exclusion, by the way, that's been shown to activate the same neural pathways as physical pain, so like, you know, a lot of physical hurt has been undergone, and that explains why so many people who've suffered it, you know, might show up in your companies as your employees and your peers, frustrated with short fuses or maladaptive responses. And so should you just let underrepresented people walk in the door and be rude jerks to you? Probably not, you know, but consider doing things like spending the effort you spend enforcing civility on enforcing inclusion instead. Have discrete, clear definitions of inclusive actions, things like diffusing information, being sure that you're getting feedback from everyone and that it's actually taken into account. And then follow up with real repercussions for circumventing those processes. Consider watching folks who have a tendency to get frustrated and intervening on their behalf. You know, if your tank is more full, sometimes just one other person speaking up is enough to turn a tide. And finally, yeah, consider having a little bit more leeway and understanding for folks that you know may have been facing structural oppression. And that's probably not fair, but you know, forget fairness. You're never going to make up for a lifetime of structural unfairness by waking up and deciding that we're going to be fair starting right now. Fairness is what gets Joan hired at too low a level, but then keeps it from being rectified outside the promotion cycle, costing her both money and the benefit of the doubt. Fairness is what leads to Joan being told that when all the managers agreed with her in a conflict, they realized they needed to come down harder on her, because otherwise that really wasn't being fair. And fairness without context is what gets Google employees meetings with HR or even fired for standing up for their underrepresented colleagues. Instead, we should be striving for fairness with context, or as I like to call it, justice, which fortunately pairs well with this fine line of accountability. As a manager Joan once said to me, if we spent 1/10 of the time we spent enacting anonymizing, hiring to just set actual goals for hiring devs of color and women and holding managers accountable, we'd actually be doing so much better. And that's not fair, but it's definitely just. And when you take up tactic 1 and go back to add more process, be sure you do some restorative leveling while you're at it, lest you wind up in a common situation where a company says, yes, things have definitely been unfair, and we see that the white guys here have been getting 6 cookies to everyone else's 1. Going forward, everyone gets 1 cookie. And if this is all not enough unfairness for you, I have one more incredibly unfair suggestion for you, which is recommendation number 5. Assume it's you. Now, what does that mean? It means that when you see someone acting in a way that seems to align with a biased interpretation of what they're doing, assume they're actually being fine and you're being biased. As Sarah May recently said in another great talk, when you're on the upward side, you must level the field. So, if you think that a woman is being abrasive, assume that's your bias. If you think that one of your peers or reports has really great talent, skill, but needs to be nicer, assume that's you. If you are requesting changes in women's code more often than in men's, assume it's you. If someone tells you another of your coworkers has problems interrupting or condescending to peers, but you've never noticed, assume you just missed it. If all the people who seem to make it through your screening process are in the overrepresented majority, consider that you're redefining merit to fit with your bias, because honestly, you probably are, especially if you think you're being unbiased. Double especially if an underrepresented person actually brought it up to you. We are definitely already checking with people to see if we're blowing things out of proportion. We are definitely already letting things go because we don't have the effort to start a fight we're probably going to lose again. Taking this approach will help you to avoid blaming the victim, which research shows is the usual outcome when messages of change focus on, say, what women can do to tackle discrimination as opposed to what other people can do. And this goes for everyone, if you're a woman or a minority too, right? All of this also applies to me. We live in a culture with messages that support structural oppression, and not one of us is untouched. So instead, you can try doing things like, if you think someone's being a jerk or a bad employee, try changing the situation before changing the person. You might be surprised how much is circumstantial. Consider trying an experiment where you give advice to someone who you think is struggling, and then watch them and see what happens. The result probably won't be what you expect. Your advice might not be as universal as you think. Finally, experiment with lending someone your privilege. Try asking an employee or peer her thoughts before a given meeting, and voice them yourself. But be sure to give her the credit when everyone inevitably loves them when they come out of your mouth. And this brings us to the final, top secret strategy that you can undertake. It's the last one, I hope you guys are ready. Spend your own capital, and I don't mean cash. So doing any of these things, pushing for process, avoiding the T word, leaving off from civility and fairness, and assuming it's you, exactly none of this is going to matter if you don't spend your own social capital. By which I mean, you need to be willing to cash in some favors from your favorite bank that aren't going to benefit you. You need to be willing to make your own in-group uncomfortable, and you might even need to risk some personal power. Change is hard, but if you aren't willing to suffer the courage of your convictions, you'll back down every time a real change can be made. In fact, as you get closer to power, especially if it's distributed informally, you will have so much more to lose, but you will also have so much more of a helpful effect. And I know that supporting change is uncomfortable, and it's gonna make some people mad at you, and that's scary, right? I know that. Do it anyways. Being an ally doesn't mean telling women in private that you agree with them or that you're sorry other people are treating her badly. It doesn't mean, as one Joan relates, telling her the CEO is treating her differently from other male department heads. She knows. Tell the CEO. Be like one white Joan, this one at a Fortune 25 company, who pointed out that the diversity panel was all white, when she could have just slid along. Even when managers organizing the panel suggested it wasn't her fight, and she probably lost a little bit of social capital on that. She did it anyway. Stand up and say, no, this is Junior Woman's project, and do it out loud. Be like Barry Hawkins, who ended up leaving Riot Games because he knew that as the head of product management, someone who reported directly to the president, he had to object to a rape joke, and it went pretty badly. But no matter how badly it went, it would have gone worse for a female executive. No matter how much you're risking, it's still less than the Jones who surround you are. And besides, this talk is for awesome people, and you're here. So you're awesome, and awesome people work for justice. I have one final note before I'm done, which is if you're worried you recognized yourself in stories or statistics here, please know that the goal of this talk is not like to call people out or make people feel bad. It's to give people strategies to live up to their images of themselves. And to the extent that you maybe feel uncomfortable about that gap, use that fire as motivation to do the hard things. Because I'm counting on you. And so are a bunch of other don'ts.